Chapter 10, The Case of the Wandering Watch. When Aldo looked around the room that night, he shook his head. Again. What a wreck, he said. Room 26 was always the neatest classroom in school. Now it's the messiest. Once again, Mr. E had not bothered to ask the students to clean up. In fact, when Helpful Holly started to collect all the art supplies, he'd stopped her. "We have to use them tomorrow," he said. "Just leave them out." Of course, they didn't have to leave paper scraps and globs of glue and piles of shiny glitter everywhere, but Aldo went to work, and soon the floor was clean, the art supplies were stacked, and the student tables were straightened. When Aldo sat down to eat dinner with us, he said, "Guys, I sure hope Mrs. Brisbane is back soon. I'll bet you do, too." "Do you think she'll be back, Aldo?" I squeaked. "Or will she become a famous ballet dancer?" "I know you think she's not coming back, Humphrey, but she is," Aldo reassured me. I was happy to hear that. "But this messy room? That's nothing," Aldo said. "You should see all the stuff kids leave lying around. I take it all to the lost and found. Coats, socks, even shoes. Wouldn't you notice you were missing one shoe? Jewelry and toys, lots of notebooks and pencils. Why, once I even found a tuba. That's a huge musical instrument." Aldo chuckled. "I can't imagine losing a tuba, but there it was. No name on it either. I took it to the lost and found. I take everything to the lost and found." "Really? That gives me a great idea," I squeaked. "Personally, I keep a close eye on my property. My wheel, sleeping hut, hamster wheel, water bottle, food dish, climbing tree, and ladder. I know where everything in my cage belongs, including my poo, which is only in my special poo corner. And the food I hide in my bedding. And of course, I always make sure my notebook and pencil are in their place." Aldo pushed a lovely bit of cauliflower through the bars of my cage. "Time to move on," he said. I watched out the window after he left, waiting for his car to leave the parking lot. There was a big orange moon that looks a lot like a Halloween pumpkin, and the man in the moon looked like a jack-o'-lantern. In the moonlight, I could see that the trees had lost most of their leaves. It was almost time for Halloween, all right. Once Aldo was gone, I raced out of my cage. "Ugh, Phoebe's watch must be in the lost and found," I squeaked. I'd like to get to it, but Thomas said there were claws and hands and snakes in there. "Boing, boing," Og replied. "I know, Thomas does exaggerate sometimes. And Aldo didn't mention any of those things," I said. "Boing, boing, boing, boing." I really don't understand this frog language, but I could tell what Og was trying to say. "You're right," I admitted. "I think I have to go. Boing! But first, I have to find Mrs. Wright's office, because that's where the lost and found is," I explained. Og dived down into his water with an impressive splash. I scurried down the leg of the table and headed back towards the door. "Wish me luck," I squeaked. "Boing, boing," Og said. I slid through the narrow space under the door, and there I was, out in the hallway of Longfellow School. It's dark in the hallway at night, of course, but there are little lights along the way, so I could see where I was going. I remembered that Mrs. Wright had said that the lost and found was in her office, inside the gym. I'd been to the library, the playground, the principal's office, but I'd never, ever seen the gym. I hurried past the other classrooms, took the turn down another hallway, past Principal Morales' office, and past the cafeteria. This was as far as I'd ever gone in my nighttime adventures at Longfellow School. But that night, I saw the hallway, took another turn past the cafeteria. I was in uncharted territory when I saw two gigantic doors. I stopped and looked up. The sign on one door read, "Gymnasium." Gym was in the word, so this must be it. The doors were tall and looked heavy, but there was a narrow space between them. It was a little tight, but I squeezed through. Even in the dim lighting, I could see that the gym was enormous. Of course, everything looks large to a small hamster, but this was the biggest room I'd ever seen. Ever! It was tall, 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 and wide, wide, wide. I'm not sure what they did in the gym, but there were hoops with nets on poles at either end and a shiny wooden floor. There was a big clock and a huge sign with numbers on it. As large as the gym was, and as little as I am, I was determined to find Phoebe's watch. There was a smaller door to the right of the main doors. I looked up and saw a sign that said, "Mrs. Wright." The space under the door was unsqueakably narrow. I took a deep breath, exhaled, and then pushed. Oof! At first, I didn't go through it all. But I gave another big push, and suddenly, there I was in Mrs. Wright's office. Now, all I had to do was find the lost and found. One wall had a cabinet with a big lock on it. I hoped that wasn't the lost and found, since I didn't know how to open a lock without a key. Luckily, the sign on it read, Equipment. I looked around and saw a desk against the opposite wall. On the shelf next to the desk, there was another sign, Lost and Found. That's it, I squeaked, even though there was no one around to hear me. At least I hoped there was no one around to hear me. There was a stack of boxes next to Mrs. Wright's desk. I was able to climb them like steps and make my way to her desktop. I paused to catch my breath, and I suddenly realized that Mrs. Wright wouldn't be happy to see me on her desk. Mrs. Wright liked to see everything in its place, and she thought my place was in my cage. Then I saw something terrible. Mrs. Wright's whistle! It was laying right there on top of her desk. Funny, I'd always imagined she wore that whistle everywhere, but I guess she went home without it. Lucky for her family. It was silver and shiny and hard. I walked right up to it, so close I could see my reflection in it. "You're not so scary," I squeaked. The whistle didn't say anything. I hadn't expected an answer, but still, I was relieved. "You're not so big," I yelled at the whistle. Again, the whistle was silent. "You're not so loud," I yelled again. The room stayed quiet, quiet, quiet. I could have stayed there a lot longer, just yelling at the loud, rude whistle, but I had work to do. Miss Wright's desk was tidy, and so was the lost and found shelf. As neat as it was, I thought about the creepy things Thomas said he'd seen, so I decided to check it out from the desk first. I didn't see anything like a snake or a severed hand, or anything even large like the tube Aldo mentioned. What I did see were large plastic bins labeled clothing, notebooks, pens and pencils, books, lunchboxes, jewelry, other. Jewelry? Phoebe's watch could be in that bin. That's where we'll stop it for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow.